May grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God and of Jesus, our Lord. Please turn to the book of Daniel. It's the last of the major prophets. It precedes the 12 smaller prophetic books at the end of the Old Testament. Daniel concerns the children of Israel in some tough circumstances. I'd like to illustrate this, hopefully, with a cartoon from Calvin and Hobbes. So Calvin is in gym class and he says, "Uh-oh, here comes Mo, the class bully. Okay, Twinkie, let's have that ball." "Sure, Mo, all yours." Never argue with a 6-year-old who shaves. And we're going to leave, and back we are. When Sandy and I were out walking the other day, we were hiking and talking about this class, and she thought I should share with you what I said about my goals. And basically, I hope that we can understand what's being written, what was written here, see some relevance in it for us, that we would appreciate the gift that we've been given, but most of all, the one who gave it to us, its author. The story of Daniel is set in the Babylonian captivity of 605 to 536. And there are two main emphases, I believe, in the book. One is the sovereignty of God, and the other is fidelity to his will in difficult times. So please, let's read the first two verses. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, and he took some of the vessels of the house of God to the land of Shinar, or Babylonia, to the house of his God. He placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Jehoiakim, the 18th king of Judah, he was an arrogant ruler who rejected the reforms of his father, Josiah, King Josiah. In the 3rd year of his reign, 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon defeated the Assyrians and Egyptians at Carchemish, a battle north. He marched south against Egypt. During the campaign, he laid siege to Jerusalem, and Judah fell under Babylonian control. From all outward appearances, it looked like Nebuchadnezzar was in charge. He plundered the vessels from the house of Israel's God. He took some of Judah's best and brightest away. He put the temple treasures into his pagan treasury as booty. But what we know is that we can't see the whole picture. The Lord gave Jehoiakim into the power of Babylon. The Lord delivered Jehoiakim. The Lord let him fall into the hands of a pagan despot. And so we have the involvement of God, the intervention of God, which I think in human affairs is not the exception, it's the norm. While we don't have eyes to look over God's shoulder, we should expect him to chasten and discipline and punish, like a gardener pruning branches or a surgeon removing cancer. We trust him even when things seem like they're out of control or make no sense. And Judah's rejection of her God was long-standing. Jehoiakim was a defiant dictator. He had a scroll dictated by Jeremiah the prophet. He cut it up, threw it in the fire. And so God's judgment came in waves with growing intensity on the whole nation. And the faithful got caught in the crossfire. And the question is, what will they do? Verse 3. Then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the children of Israel, even some of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect, handsome in appearance, suitable for every kind of wisdom, endowed with knowledge, proficient in understanding, competent to serve in the king's palace, and to teach them the letters, maybe literature, and language of the Chaldeans or Babylonians. Verse 5, the king assigned them a daily portion of the royal food and of the wine which he drank. They were to be educated 3 years, and at the end of that time, they would enter the king's service. Now among them from the children of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These were introduced to us last week by Kyle Reinerson. And the chief of the court officials gave them new names. To Daniel, he assigned the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. So Ashpenaz, this chief of staff, his job was to take these most promising Judeans and indoctrinate them in the words and the ways of Babylon, to make them Babylonian. This meant Babylonian vocabulary, books, names, and diet. The names of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah meant something. They were honorifics. They were affirmations of praise and faith in the only God. Daniel, God is judge. God is judge, or my judge is God. Hananiah, the Lord has been gracious. Mishael, who is like God. And Azariah, the Lord, Yahweh, has helped. Then they're given new names, referring to Babylonian deities, Bel, Aku, Nebo. And these new names meant or implied a new allegiance, a new identity. They were subjects. They were to be subjects of Babylon. This re-education, this reorientation included Babylonian food and drink. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food and the wine which he drank. Therefore, he sought permission from the chief of the court officials that he might not defile himself like this. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion or sympathy in the sight of the chief of the court officials. Yet he said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king of Nebuchadnezzar, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see you looking worse than the young men who are your own age? Then you would endanger my life with the king, forfeit my head to the king. So they're going to conform, they're going to compromise. Our young heroes were determined not to contaminate themselves with food that violated the purity laws of Israel. It was here they drew the line. Unclean food, swine's flesh, would defile them, I think, hinder their coming to God. In verse 9, God gave Daniel favor in the chief official's eyes, but this overseer was afraid of the king and what would happen to him if their health deteriorated. So the young Judeans go to plan B. Then Daniel spoke to the guardian, the steward, the guard, whom the chief of the officials appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test your servants, prove your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the king's food, and deal with your servants in light of what you see. So Daniel approaches another official, lower ranking guardian or steward, who agrees to this 10-day testing period when the 4 young men would eat only vegetables and drink only water. Now, I think vegetables here refers to food from the vegetable kingdom. That would include grains, seeds, beans, lentils, peas, peanuts. Considered inferior to the rich delicacies, royal cuisine from Nebuchadnezzar's own home, palace. And in number 10, in apocalyptic language, literature, which Daniel is a number of completeness. May not be literal. It might just be proportionate or adequate, complete amount of time, enough to do this test. Verse 14, so he listened to them, the guardian listened to them in this matter and tested them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their appearance looked better and their bodies healthier than all the young men who ate the king's food. So the guardian withdrew their royal food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. After this test, they looked better, healthier, more robust than all the others. So was this divine intervention? Was it good diet, good nutrition, a combination of both? For sure, their faith, their courage, their strategy, perseverance, they were all rewarded. These guys ate their vegetables instead of this non-kosher meat, and they flourished. So their first request, their first approach hit a wall, but they kept going. And so maybe a little lesson there when our first efforts aren't successful. Verse 17, as for these 4 young men, God gave them understanding and insight in every branch of literature and wisdom. And Daniel had discernment in all kinds of visions and dreams. At the end of the time which the king had set to bring them in, the chief of the court officials brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke with them, and among them all, no one could be found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the service of the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his entire realm, these power brokers. And Daniel remained there until the first year of Cyrus the king, probably around 539 BC. So if I could pull up a slide here. We'll keep going. The knowledge of God. I have a quotation from Joyce Baldwin here. These young men from Jerusalem's court needed to be secure in their knowledge of Yahweh, to be able to study this literature objectively without allowing it to undermine their faith. Evidently, the work of Jeremiah, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk had not been in vain. They had been trained and taught ahead of time. They knew what was true and what was false. And so they had a good background and grounding for this new challenge. And so the discussion question I'd like for us to think about for a couple of minutes anyway, at least as we start here. Let me get rid of myself. How can Christian fathers and mothers, mentors and teachers, Christians who care, devote themselves to passing on the knowledge of God to our children? Would that include an examination of current thinking, what people are saying now, people are doing now, what they like and don't, or accept and don't, with a careful Christian response? So that's the first question I'd like us to think about, and we'll pause for a moment. So the first point was about the knowledge of God. The second is character and faith in adversity. God was with these young men. He gave them special discernment, what they needed for the hour. And this was preceded, it was rooted in a wholehearted commitment to God and obedience to his will. They had this foundation. They were representatives of the only true God. They were living examples that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And again, a quote from John Goldingay. If the God of Israel is God, it is to be expected that he will enable his people to offer better counsel than those who seek their wisdom from other sources. These were challenging times in an unfriendly place. And it was here that Daniel was not only a trusted advisor, he was also a channel of God's revelation that we're going to find out more about. And from Joyce Baldwin, who says these courageous actions testify to faith, and character is strengthened to face even more difficult situations in the future. So I think Hebrews 12 and Romans 5 are just absolutely emphatic about suffering being crucial for our spiritual growth. And then again, we have one more cartoon. They're out on the lake, Calvin and his parents, and Hobbs there. Remember last year when it rained all week? It poured so hard we couldn't even make a fire. Without question, that was one of the worst experiences of my life. But his dad says, yes, but it built character. Oh, sure. Why can't I ever build character at a Miami condo or a casino somewhere? So I guess the question was, what does, a second question for discussion, what does Daniel teach us about faithfulness and obedience before as well as during times of crisis, times of disorientation? How are we to see hardships and adversity? Let's pause for a moment and discuss that. And then my third point and last point is the sovereignty of God, which runs, I think, through the entire book. Chapter 1, verse 21, and Daniel continued, he remained there until the first year of Cyrus the king. So Daniel served the kings of Babylon until the empire fell to Cyrus and the Persians in 539. This is a word of hope. John Goldingay again points out that the name Nebuchadnezzar, the person Nebuchadnezzar, brought Israel's exile, but Cyrus will bring its end. Nebuchadnezzar meant invasion, siege, defeat, plundering, captivity. But Cyrus means deliverance and freedom, restoration and rebuilding, the joy of going home. And in this text from Isaiah 45, God says, I will raise up Cyrus in my righteousness. I will make all his ways straight. He will rebuild my city and set my exiles free. So God raised Cyrus, brought Cyrus into power. So ultimately, again, the book is about the sovereignty of God. The Holy One of Israel is in control of the world and world history. He brought judgment on people in power, verse 2. I think he touched the hearts of foreign leaders, verse 19. And he enhanced the the skills and abilities, intelligence of Daniel and his three friends. Verse 17. So God will ultimately triumph over evil, arrogance, and pride. He will vindicate his faithful ones and bring them home. In conclusion, I'd like to play a recording of a wonderful hymn from the Timeless collection. It's called Hear My Cry, O God, O Lord, and it's based on Psalm 5, a morning prayer, with words and music by Marva Hughes. But I want to share these words from 2 John 3 before we play the song. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love.
Hear my cry, O Lord, my God, early unto you I pray, as to you I lift my voice. Hear, O Lord, my King, this day. Lord, surround me with your favor, as a shield my refuge be. I will sing with joy forever. Hear, O Lord, my plea. You have no delight in sin, nor in arrogance and pride. Evil cannot stand with you, nor the guilty from you hide. Lord, surround me with your favor, as a shield my refuge be. I will sing with joy forever. Hear, O Lord, my plea. Banish now my enemies, let them by their counsels fall, for their